Thank you so much. That's always exquisitely hard to listen to, but I so appreciated it. So it's great to be back, and this is my escape day from Boston, and to be back on campus is just fabulous. You guys are so lucky to be here and to have each other to go. I wanted to, just before I get started, just say thank you to everyone who got here. And Megan is somewhere. I can't see anyone from up here, but to Megan, to Adam, wherever you are, and especially to, I don't know if Mary Jordan is still here, but Mary Jordan, I think, is the person who somehow crowded me into doing this. And Mary, to you and to the other students, we've had four Notre Dame students work with our program every summer. And Mary was 2 years ago with Daniela. I can't see who else is there. And then I don't know if Thomas and Joey are here, but they were here last summer. But they were fabulous. They come to our program and just open up our eyes to what the world is all about. Now, to get started, I just wanted to tell you a story about something about what do we owe each other and how do we care for each other. And I want to I'm going to just give you a quick little background of how I got to be where I am, which is entirely by serendipity, and then just tell you a story about what continuity and care is all about from our perspective. So I was, didn't get to medical school till I was 30. My mother didn't let me talk about the years between Notre Dame and getting to medical school. But if we have a beer afterwards, I'll tell you some of those. I finally got to medical school. I did the medical school. I trained in medicine for residency, and I was going to become an oncologist. I was fascinated by end-of-life care and palliative care, hospice care, and I wanted to become a specialist in that. But I got pulled into my chief of medicine's office in March of my last year, and he said that there had been a program, the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation, had given money to the mayor of Boston to set up a program for homeless people. And the homeless people who had been called together to be the stakeholders in this, of whom this picture is a kind of a representative, were insisting that there had to be a full-time doctor. And they said, if we're going to have a chance to tell you how we want to be cared for, we want it just like everybody else. They said, we don't want any charity. We don't want volunteers coming in and out, even though I believed entirely in volunteerism. But they wanted consistency and continuity of care that went from the streets and the shelters all the way through to the hospital. And that's what they set up for us. And many of them are on our board of directors today. We've grown to be a relatively big program that I won't bore you with. But what they taught me about is I went from the hospital, right, where I was in charge of, I remember my last rotation was running the ICU. I was a senior medicine in charge of the medical ICU. And, I thought I had arrived. When you do that and you're a senior resident, you think you've done it. And you have an ego that could never fit into this tent. And I was going to go, after doing that, where I thought I was managing the most complicated thing, I was going to go 6 blocks down the street and be the first doctor in a clinic in a shelter called Pine Street Inn. And I figured, how tough can that be? I'm going from this big hospital down the street. And I got to the shelter, and it was crazy. It was 800 people in this shelter. It was chaos. It was kind of fun in a way, but it was real chaotic. And when I went into the clinic, there were a bunch of nurses who had been taking care of homeless people for a long time, without the help of doctors, as they pointed out very carefully. And they sat me down and made me soak feet for 2 months before I could do anything medical. I should have brought a picture to show you what that's like, but it was painful to think I was going to be in New York City doing an oncology resident, and here I am soaking feet. I'm not allowed to be a doctor, not allowed to do anything except take care of people. And so that was how it all got started, about how do you earn the trust of people who have been scarred by most of our institutions, including, and most particularly, our own medical institutions. So I'm going to tell you this story. This is Michael, who, by the way, he's passed away, but he wanted me to show these slides whenever we talk, so I'm going to put something together that I don't usually do. But I met him the first night I was on a van called the Pine Street Inn van, and he was a man who lived outside, never came into the shelter. And in Boston, we have shelter beds for everyone who wants one, and there's a very small number of people who, despite the cold weather, stay outside. And they are sort of a very distinct subgroup of the homeless population, which we could talk about some of the time. But Michael stayed outside. And I met him on the van, which I think is this is what the van looks like. And it was another request of the homeless people about how they wanted to be served. This van goes out every night from 9 at night till 5 in the morning, brings soup, sandwiches, and blankets and stuff to people who live outside. I had wanted it to be a medical van, but the homeless people said, we don't want doctors in the middle of the night, we want stuff. And so this van is run by these are the heroes in this story. They're the people that have jobs on this van every night, and they know everyone who's been outside. Boston's a relatively small geographic town, so they literally know 95, if not more than that, of the homeless people on the streets. And so I got to ride in this van 2 nights a week for 35 years, serving coffee and stuff, and I could then, by the back door, say, oh, by the way, if you need anything, I'm a doctor. And that was the way they wanted us to approach it. So Michael would see nonstop, and I finally got a little bit of time to, I'd have a cup of coffee with him, and he'd tell me his story. And he'd grown up in the South. He had been removed from his family because of extreme abuse, and he was sent up to live with another family member up in Boston, which turned out to be equally abusive, if not more so. And he ended up on the streets when he was 14. Okay, and he never learned to read or write. He's as ADD as you could imagine. He can't sit still. And imagine that was a learning disability that, God, should have been addressed a long time ago and wasn't. But anyway, so he's outside, and he has incredibly great street skills. He can't read, but he can charm you. He can remember your name, he remembers it, and he knew how to work for people. And as the years, that picture, the first one I showed you was in 1986. The second one was in 1992 when we started, not only at nighttime, but we started going out and realizing we had to do some care to people on the streets during the daytime. At nighttime, there's no services open. So then Frame Shifts is now 15 or 20 years, and we're taking care of Michael. I got to know a lot about him. He had 1 million medical problems. He had a pretty significant cocaine use disorder, and he just was, surviving outside, and he couldn't handle the inside of a room where he had to stay still. So one day, as I've gotten to know him, this is him. He stayed outside a Starbucks down at one of our really ritzy places, and he knew everybody going in and out. He was really quite extraordinary. And he asked me that day, he said he wasn't feeling well, and he had all these nodes on his over his clavicles. So I brought him we have a clinic at MGH for street folks where I could bring him in and do the studies. And it turned out he had prostate cancer, which was already metastatic or spread to several areas. So we got him connected to all the stuff at MGH, he had to get chemotherapy and radiation, but he had no place to be. So we brought him over to this place we call a medical respite program. And that was another thing that we had to set up back in 1985 because of what homeless people wanted. And think of this, so we will admit people to the hospital when you're really sick, discharge you when you're really not that well yet, and most of us go home and you have family to take care of you and visiting nurses and home health aid. But not if you live on the streets or in the shelters. You go back to the streets. And so this was an appeal by homeless people to say, we need some place to go, some step-down hospital where we can go and be taken care of 24 hours a day by nurses and doctors when we're really sick. And for example, now Michael, think of it, he's now got cancer that's really spread around. He needs chemotherapy, he needs radiation, and he needs a place to be safe. So we brought him here, and he taught us a lot when he came, and that's what I wanted to show you. So this is a picture of him. This is a man I had only known outside, and he came into our McGinnis house where several of you worked last summer, and he just lit up. And here I am feeling terrible for him because he's got this awful cancer. And he came in and he said, look, Doc, I've got a bed, I've got a TV, 3 meals a day. And this is Julie on the left and one of our nurses on the right. And he said, I have these great people taking care of me. And I started to realize how excluded we have made people and how lonely they can become. And the simplest things brought that smile to his face. And he would smile more, but he has no teeth, so he won't show you the rest of his smile. But he charmed everybody. He loved him. He stayed there. We got him through chemotherapy. It lasted about 3 months, and his cancer went into remission. But we didn't want to send him back to the streets because he had no place to live. So we have another place. It's a step-down respite program in this building. And so we got him to go over there. And he went over there and rapidly changed the place around because he's so charming. And the first thing we learned about him is he loved animals. Speaking of barking dogs. And he This is a therapy dog that would come over to, I think, several times a week, and he just took charge of making sure every patient got a chance to see that. And this is him there, and I'll never forget, he was like in heaven as long as the animals were there. But while he was there, we could also get, our social workers, who are fabulous, were able to find him a place to live, and which is not easy to do in Boston. And this is him signing the first lease for a home he's ever had. He's 62 years old now, right? And he's just happy as can be. And so we drove him over to his place, so this is, what, 30, almost 30 years on the streets, and he finally has a place. We drive him over, but he won't let us go until we stop by the animal shelter and get him a cat. And this is his cat. And you really get the picture here. This is the stuff that people need in order to begin to heal, right? And this is him. He's just smiling. We took him to his place, and I'm sorry. I guess one of the pictures fell off. I have a picture of what his place was, but it was his apartment. It was really beautiful. He set it up nicely. He had a couch, and he had his TV, all the stuff that you really need. And he really thrived there. The problem was we had to visit him at home now. We used to see him on the street. Now we had to go and see him at home because he's got all sorts of other medical problems in addition to his cancer. And so he would call up in the middle of the night, and you'd get the page and I'd be really worried about him. And it would be, how the hell do you do this clicker on the TV, And I started to realize, my medical knowledge was starting to become smaller or maybe wider or whatever it is. Or the other favorite one he would do is usually around 8:30 at night, he'd call, and we'd be just finishing up clinic, and he'd say, "Doc, you gotta get me a meatball sub from same old place in Jamaica Plain." And we would scratch our heads about, do we do this? And we would do it because he was just too charming. But then we became his full service team, right? But now it goes on, and 5 years down the line now, he's got recurrent cancer. Now it's really bad. It's going everywhere. So he was in remission for a pretty long time. And this is him now with Becky, who's our nurse. And to get him now, he has pretty heavy-duty chemotherapy, but it won't cure him now. It'll just keep, it's what we call palliative. And but we had to get him to chemotherapy at the hospital every day. And it was kind of a chore to do. So Becky, or somebody on our team would pick him up, bring him here to the hospital. And before we would go in, we'd had to get him breakfast. This was part of the deal. And I don't know if you noticed, there's more maple syrup on that French toast than you would ever want to have. But that was just part of the deal. And then he would go upstairs to the chemotherapy suite and do all that. And I'll never forget going in to see him. Now it's really grim because he has a very limited life prognosis now, and I'm feeling anxious about all this. And so I go up to see him in the chemotherapy suite, which is usually not the happiest of places. And he's doing the same thing. He's sitting in bed, the bed is up, he's got a flat screen TV in front of him, and there's two nurses, one putting his IV in, another one helping him out, and he's got food in front of him. And he looks at me and he goes, "Doc, it just doesn't get any better than this." And I wanted to, cry, because it was like, for this poor guy who was given nothing in life, he could find the joy in these moments where we were finding nothing but sorrow. So he then did well for about 6 months, and then it became really clear the chemotherapy wasn't working. We had to stop. And now he's in pain because the cancer is now spread to his bones, and bone pain is really terrible. You really need heavy-duty medicine. And so he's now at his home. This is his home. And we're trying to get him to come to the hospital where we can give him the medicine he needs to get out of pain. But he won't go because he's got the cat. And he will not leave the cat alone at home. And so, put this into the other obstacles or barriers to getting good health care. So we have this phenomenal physician assistant named Jen Nunes, who was with me the day we were visiting him here, trying to tuck him in. And she said, "Look, I'll take the cat and take care of him at home." And as soon as that was done, he said, "Okay, I'll go to the hospital." And he came in, and now he's literally got days to live at most, and he's in real agony. So he calls up. He goes to the hospital. We finally get him admitted, did all that, and I went home that night. And he called up later on in the night, and he said, "Doc, can you bring me a Big Mac with no lettuce? Please, no lettuce. And just bring it to me in the morning when I'm awake." And I'm thinking about this. This guy is, days away from dying at most, and he wants a Big Mac. And so I now no longer am annoyed with McDonald's. I will now accept it as what it is. But so I brought it to him the next morning. And I walk in, and he looks like he's about to die. He's in bed, lying down. And I kind of was cheap. I said, "Michael, are you sure you want this sandwich?" And he sits up, like that. This is the last picture I have of him. He died 2 days after this. And he sat up and he just smiled and he just wanted to smell this Big Mac. And we sat there, and I was with one of our nurse practitioners, and it was just this man who was about to die finding joy in the moment in a way that most of us can never do. So I keep thinking, in this world of what do we owe each other? One, I think we owe each other to stick with each other. When I think of the 3 other talks tonight, they kind of all fit into my thing. It's walking with people through the thick and the thin, the bad and the good, but being there with them. And we realized that we were not going to cure him of this, but we could walk with him. We could be with him through it all. And what he appreciated most was the love and the joy that everybody would give to him. And he didn't expect anything from us except food when he needed it. And I was thinking, he's a guy who was born with literally nothing, never learned how to read or write, was abused from the time he was 6 years old, and never had a place to live until a few days before he died. And I think that defined for us what our jobs were. We used to think of what's the outcomes we're looking for, and we stopped thinking like that. What we're in it is to take care of people and take care of each other, no matter what happens, because standing with each other is what it's all about. I think that I want to show you one last picture, because I have so many people to thank. But this picture was, I know Bill and Angie are here. This is Gabriella, our little daughter, who was here 2 years ago and still talks about Bill and Angie. She came to a Red Sox game with us. By the way, she came to Notre Dame for her first football game, and my first one in 15 years, on early September. We came, it was a beautiful weekend, it was great. We met Father Dowd, who was just fabulous. Steve Reifenberg took us around, and we stayed with him. It just was magnificent, the whole weekend, except it was a Northern Illinois game. And so my daughter, who is now an absolute fanatic Notre Dame fan, except football she can leave aside when I've got to fix her in that. But she decided she wants to skip high school and just come right here. But this is them we were at a Red Sox game, and that's with a man that we had gotten to know. For 30 years, he lived under a dumpster near the Brigham and Women's Hospital. And now, he's going to a baseball game with him, with my family, was like the best thing ever. And he still talks about it. But I realized it's all these little things that you heard about in bicycle rides, in telling stories. And can't wait to learn. I can't see where he is now, but AI is going to be huge in our world. And we're going to be able to help, I think, eliminate many and many of these disparities. But I'm going to end by just saying thank you all. It's really been a pleasure to be here. And, as I look back, I've been doing the same job for 40 years, and I'm embarrassed that I'm so old now. I don't know how it happened. So be careful. You get old quickly without knowing it. But along the way, we now realize it's really these stories, these relationships that really are what we owe each other, and which you really need to cultivate. All the rest kind of falls away, and it's all about these stories. So thank you. I am so proud to be a Notre Dame grad, and how much I've learned from all of you. Okay, thanks, Down.